If you are listening to this right now, you are probably in the middle of a massive, exhausting milestone.
Oh, absolutely.
You're putting in the hours, drinking way too much coffee, and just staring down the BCBA 6th edition certification exam.
The grind is very real.
It really is. So, welcome to Behavioral Intelligence with Mara Sánchez. Whether you're a graduate student just grinding through your coursework or an RBT ready to, level up to the big leagues, the mission for today's deep dive is to help you completely master Domain A.
Specifically, Concept A.5.
Right. Identify and describe the dimensions of applied behavior analysis. We want to get this information past the point of just flashcard memorization. We need it to be a deep functional understanding.
Because the 7 dimensions we're unpacking today, they are the absolute bedrock of modern applied behavior analysis.
Literally the foundation.
Exactly. Before anyone can design complex interventions or untangle intricate functional analyses, they have to know these foundational rules. On the certification exam, this concept is a guaranteed heavy hitter.
You are definitely going to see it.
Without a doubt. You're going to see questions that test your ability to not only define these dimensions, but to actually apply them to tricky, real-world clinical scenarios.
Where things are intentionally left ambiguous, of course.
Always. Test writers love ambiguity.
They really do. And to really understand them, we have to talk about where these dimensions actually came from.
Right, the history.
Yeah, we're looking at a classic piece of literature from 1968.
Published in the very first volume of the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis.
JBA, yep. The paper was written by 3 foundational figures in our field.
Baer, Wolf, and Risley.
Baer, Wolf, and Risley. And the historical context of that 1968 paper is, well, it's vital for understanding why these dimensions even exist in the first place.
It is, because at that time, mainstream psychology was heavily dominated by internal explanations for human behavior.
Right.
Therapies often focus on unobservable theories. Unconscious conflicts, internal drives.
Things you could not physically see or measure.
Exactly. So Baer, Wolf, and Risley essentially planted a flag in the ground. They wanted to define exactly what it means to practice applied behavior analysis.
As a distinct, rigorous, and scientific discipline.
Yes. They were moving the science out of the laboratory, away from the rats and pigeons, and into the real world with human beings.
Which was a massive shift. And what stands out in the source materials is that almost 20 years later, in 1987, those exact same original authors published a follow-up paper. They looked back at the field and confirmed that these 7 dimensions remained the functional criteria for defining and judging ABA.
They are just as relevant to your clinical practice today as they were decades ago.
Good science stands the test of time.
It really does. So let's break these 7 dimensions down for you. We can group the first 3 as the what and the how of our field.
Okay, the what and the how.
Right. Applied, behavioral, and analytic.
Let's start with the first dimension. Applied.
This dictates that our field is solely focused on targeting socially significant behaviors.
Right. We aren't just changing behavior because we can. Or because it makes a classroom slightly quieter for a teacher.
No, we are focusing on behaviors that genuinely improve a person's life.
We're talking about social skills, language, academics, daily living, or vocational skills.
To put this into a clinical context, imagine you are working with a young child diagnosed with autism.
Okay.
The applied dimension dictates that you prioritize teaching them functional communication skills, like how to ask for water or a break, or how to play safely and interact with their peers.
You wouldn't focus on arbitrary tasks.
Exactly. Teaching them to memorize the capitals of all 50 states might be an impressive party trick.
But it doesn't really help them in life.
Right. Unless that specific skill somehow deeply enhances their daily social experience, it is not socially significant. The intervention must matter to the client and to those in their immediate environment.
It has to pass the so what test.
The so what test, yes.
We always have to ask ourselves how the target behavior improves the client's independence.
Precisely. Which brings us to the second dimension, behavioral.
This is the core of what we do.
It is. We have to focus on the actual physical behavior in need of improvement. And it must be observable and measurable.
This brings up a hurdle you will undoubtedly face on the exam. Distinguishing a true behavior from a state of being.
Oh, the mock exam sources highlight a classic concept for this.
The dead man's test.
The dead man's test. It's a simple, somewhat morbid rule.
If a dead man can do it...
It is not a behavior.
Right. A dead man can wear glasses. A dead man can be quiet.
That dead man can stay in his seat.
Exactly. Those aren't behaviors. Putting the glasses on, speaking at a conversational volume, or actively writing on a worksheet, those are behaviors.
And test writers use this to set traps for you.
They do.
When you are reading scenario questions, you have to watch out for vague, judgmental descriptions. If a question describes a client as being out of control, angry, or anxious, that violates the behavioral dimension.
Because we can't measure out of control.
Right. My definition of out of control might be completely different from yours. We need precise, objective topographies.
Like kicking a desk with enough force to be audible 10 feet away.
Yes. That is observable. It is measurable.
That distinction is huge for test day. Now let's look at the third dimension, analytic.
This is a tricky one.
It is. When I first started studying, I assumed analytic just meant taking data and putting it on a line graph. Like if I have a graph, I'm analyzing, right?
That is a very common trap.
Yeah.
Simply collecting and graphing data is not enough to satisfy the analytic dimension. Analytic means demonstrating experimental control.
Meaning you have successfully proven that your specific intervention, the independent variable, is the sole reason for the change in the target behavior.
The dependent variable, exactly. You have to prove a functional relationship.
It's about proving cause and effect.
For a clinical example, let's say a client is screaming during work time. You don't just implement a brake system, see the screaming stop, and call it a day.
Because that's not analytic.
Right. To be truly analytic, you have to prove your intervention was the thing that worked. You might turn a demand condition on, observe the screaming increase, and then turn the demand condition off.
And observe the screaming decrease.
Yes. By turning it on and off, you are actively proving that the demand is the trigger. You are demonstrating that you have control over the behavior through environmental manipulation.
You aren't guessing, you are proving it.
That covers the first three. Now we shift to the blueprint and the roots of our practice. Technological and conceptually systematic.
Okay, dimension 4 is technological. Think of this as the recipe dimension.
The recipe. I like that.
If you have a recipe for the world's best chocolate chip cookies, but it just says, mix ingredients and bake until done.
Anyone else who tries to bake them is going to end up with a mess.
Exactly. In ABA, your procedures must be described clearly, concisely, and completely enough that another practitioner could pick up your written plan and replicate your exact results.
The original 1968 paper provides a stark example of this.
Oh, the extinction one.
Yes. They noted that if a behavior plan simply says to put a tantrum on extinction by placing a child in a room, that is not a technological description.
Because extinction in behavior analysis means completely withholding the reinforcement that was previously keeping a behavior alive.
Right. So if the plan just says put it on extinction, it leaves way too much to interpretation. It must specify exactly what the practitioner should do if the child bangs on the window, or smears feces on the walls, or starts making choking sounds.
Saying just ignore it is not a technological description.
Not at all. Every potential variable and reaction must be explicitly detailed.
Let's apply this to a mock exam scenario from our sources. We have Eric, an institutional psychologist and BCBA.
Okay.
He is working on a token economy to boost worker production at an auto parts factory. The question notes that Eric is carefully outlining his step-by-step procedures and hopes that this exact model can work in other institutional settings.
So what dimension is that?
Because he's writing it out specifically for future replication by others, he is practicing the technological dimension.
Which leads directly into dimension 5, conceptually systematic.
This dimension mandates that our interventions must be based on the established underlying principles of behavior.
We are talking about the fundamental laws of learning. Positive and negative reinforcement, extinction, stimulus control, and so on. We cannot just pull random interventions out of thin air.
This is where we have to leave our personal opinions and pop psychology at the door.
We really do.
If a client engages in aggression, we don't explain their behavior by saying, well, his chakras were obviously out of alignment today.
Right. Or he just has a defiant personality.
Exactly. We use behavior analytic terms. We talk about motivating operations.
Which are the environmental variables that make a reward more or less valuable at that exact moment.
And we talk about discriminative stimuli, the signals in the environment that tell the client reinforcement is available.
Grounding our work in those established principles is what separates ABA from a grab bag of random techniques.
Let's look at another mock exam scenario to see how this is tested. You encounter a question about Mr. Han, a positive behavior support specialist.
Okay, Mr. Han.
He's asked to help with a student who tantrums to escape difficult math assignments. Mr. Hahn creates an intervention based on differential reinforcement of alternative behavior, or DRA.
And just to quickly review DRA for everyone listening, that means Mr. Hahn is putting the problem behavior, the tantrum, on extinction, so it no longer works to escape the math work.
While simultaneously providing positive reinforcement when the student asks for a break appropriately.
Exactly. So the scenario asks, what dimension is Mr. Hahn demonstrating?
Because he relies on basic, proven behavior change principles like DRA, extinction, and positive reinforcement, rather than alternative philosophies, he is being conceptually systematic.
Every procedure he uses ties back to the foundational science.
We are in the home stretch of the dimensions now.
We are. Let's look at the final two, which really deal with the overall impact of our work.
Effective and generality.
Dimension 6 is effective. This means our interventions must produce practical, meaningful results.
It is not just about getting a statistical change on a piece of paper.
This distinction between statistical change and clinical significance is vital.
Right.
Consider a client who engages in severe, self-injurious headbanging 100 times an hour. If your intervention reduces that to 75 times an hour, you've achieved a statistical change.
The data trended down.
But is it an effective change? No. The client is still in profound danger, and their quality of life is not meaningfully improved.
The change must be of a practical magnitude.
It must alter the actual reasons the behavior was originally chosen for intervention in the first place.
If the behavior doesn't change enough to make a real difference in the client's everyday life, the effective dimension hasn't been met.
Precisely. Finally, dimension 7, generality.
We want these beautiful, effective behavior changes to actually stick around.
Generality is achieved when a behavior change lasts over time, occurs across different environments or settings, spreads to other individuals, or cascades into other related behaviors.
So if a child only uses their communication device in the clinic room with one specific therapist,
we haven't achieved generality. The ultimate goal of our science is for the learner to contact natural reinforcement in their everyday world, independent of the clinical setting.
let's hit one more mock exam scenario for this one.
Let's do it.
Imagine a client named Simone. Simone learned appropriate ways to request her favorite toys during clinical sessions. The scenario explicitly notes that 3 years later, Simone is still requesting her toys appropriately without engaging in any problem behavior.
Okay.
The exam asks you, which dimension is most applicable here?
The answer is generality.
Specifically because the behavior maintained over a significant period of time.
Those mock exam scenarios are highly representative of what you will face. Now that we have covered the definitions of all 7, we should transition into how the exam actually tries to trick you.
Oh, test writers are clever. And there are common pitfalls that trip up even the most prepared student.
They really love to set traps here.
They know we live in a highly digital world, so they'll try to bait us into trap number 1.
Confusing the word technological with actual modern technology.
Yes. They will give you a scenario where a BCBA is using iPads, augmentative communication devices, or telehealth software, and they will ask what dimension is being highlighted.
Do not take the bait.
Using an iPad does not automatically mean you are being technological. Technological only refers to procedures being written clearly enough to be replicated like a recipe.
Trap number 2 relies on a similar linguistic trick. It is confusing the analytic dimension with merely taking data.
We mentioned this earlier, but it is so important.
You will see scenarios where a teacher takes meticulous ABC, data antecedent, behavior, consequence, or plots, a gorgeous scatter plot with students' disruptions.
But if they haven't manipulated variables to prove experimental control,
they have not satisfied the analytic dimension. Observation is not analysis in the context of the 7 dimensions.
You always have to look for that cause and effect proof. Did they turn the intervention on and off? Did they use a specific experimental design? If not, it isn't analytic.
And here's a broader exam tip regarding the structure of these questions.
Listen up for this one.
The exam rarely asks you to simply define a dimension directly. Instead, questions frequently test your ability to identify which dimension is missing or violated in a given scenario. You have to play detective.
I've seen so many of those on practice tests. Let's walk through how to approach one. Think about a scenario featuring a BCBA named George.
All right, George.
George writes a great behavior intervention plan at the beginning of the school year. As the year goes on, he verbally tweaks the plan in practice with the classroom paraprofessionals. He makes little changes here and there based on the student's progress. However, the written plan in the binder is never updated from the original draft.
Okay.
Which dimension is George violating?
Well, If we break down George's actions, the fundamental problem is the documentation.
Right.
A new practitioner coming into that classroom would read the original plan in the binder, but that written plan no longer matches what the staff is actually doing.
Reliable replication by a third party is now impossible.
Therefore, George has violated the technological dimension.
When you read a scenario, always look for what is broken or missing.
Exactly.
Okay, to make sure you have all 7 of these locked in your brain on test day, we have 2 bulletproof memory tricks from the study materials.
You should memorize one of these mnemonics, and the very first thing you do when you sit down at your testing computer is write it at the top of your digital whiteboard or scratch paper.
Mnemonics are incredibly useful for cognitive offloading. When you are 3 hours into a high-stakes exam, you don't want to be burning mental energy trying to recall a list.
You really don't.
Exactly. Option 1 is bat cage. Think of a literal bat in a cage.
B for behavioral,
A for applied.
T for technological,
C for conceptually systematic.
I for analytic,
G for generality.
E for effective,
Bat cage.
and the alternative mnemonic.
Option 2 is DTACA, like you are hailing a taxi.
G for generality,
And for effect.
T for technological,
A for applied.
C for conceptually systematic,
Or analytic.
B for behavioral.
DTACA. Just pick whichever one resonates with you, memorize it, and own it.
Having that visual reference on your scratch paper will anchor you when the exam fatigue inevitably sets in.
We have covered some serious ground today. Let's do a rapid-fire review to lock this all in.
The 7 dimensions of ABA are the gold standard for our field, first defined in 1968. To be practicing true ABA, your intervention must be
Applied. Socially significant to the client.
behavioral, targeting an observable, measurable action, not a dead man's state.
Analytic. Demonstrating experimental control over the behavior.
Technological, written clearly enough for a stranger to replicate.
Conceptually systematic. Grounded in the basic principles of behaviorism.
Effective, producing practical, life-changing results.
And generality. Lasting across time, settings, and other behaviors.
You now have the tools, the historical context, and the specific exam strategies to approach Domain A.5 with absolute confidence.
So, take a breath. Celebrate the fact that you just mastered a foundational topic of your exam prep. You are putting in the work, and it is going to pay off.
Absolutely.
Keep this momentum going and continue right on to the next concept in Domain A of the BCBA 6th edition Test Content Outline.
Before we go, consider this. As artificial intelligence and machine learning step further into the clinical space, capable of parsing massive data sets and generating behavior plans in seconds, who ultimately holds the responsibility for the analytic dimension?
Wow.
If an algorithm finds the functional relationship between a complex set of environmental variables and a behavior, is the BCBA still the analyst? Or are we just the implementers of a machine's experimental control? It is a paradigm shift to think about as you prepare to enter the field and shape its future.
That is definitely something to chew on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep studying, keep analyzing, and we will catch you on the next one.